everyone, Lytro Storm here, and today I'm going over what might have happened had Total Drama World Tour been different. But actually, we're making it more similar to the other seasons. It's the only season of the show to have more than the usual 2 teams, so what if we got rid of that and kept just 2? This would certainly see a lot of new dynamics and differences from the original show, so I think it would be very interesting to theorize about, and that's exactly what I'm here to do. So I'm just gonna run down what I think would happen given the events already written in the show. This is a what if, not a rewrite, so I'm gonna keep things as close to the original as possible, and just see what would realistically change off of this. So, let's get into it now. To start with, we've got 2 different ways we can find out the teams. First method is to go the traditional way. Team building challenge was a race, so you'd split it to make the first person be on team 1, then the second on team 2, the third on team 1, and just keep alternating. However, this method leads to a few questions as some characters cross the finish line at very similar times, and some of them do it off screen. For example, when Lindsay and Bridget are about to cross, Lindsay is in the front, but then it cuts away and cuts back to them walking to their teams, and now Bridget is in front. Oh, did Bridget pass Lindsay before they crossed? Not sure. And what about Gwen and Courtney? We never see either of them cross, so which one goes on which team? And there's a few others as well. There's also the question of character dynamics, which I think would be lost quite a bit if we used this method. To mention the rewards for the order the team crossed in, which team gets it if the people crossing were divided up? You try to avoid these questions. The closest I could get to the teams using this method is on the screen now, and you can kind of tell that it's a mismatch. Kind of thing could be interesting, but when I'm basing the story off the original episodes, it makes it a lot harder to write that way. So I present method 2, which just uses the rule set Chris used when dividing the teams in the show. First half to cross get to be on team 1, and the second half join team 2. Obviously it was 3 teams before, but you see the point here. Look at the teams this way, it lines up more with the original, but still has some combinations that could be really interesting. So I'm just going to be using this as the set of teams for this video. Yeah, I could revisit this idea at some point if there's enough demand for it. But with that out of the way, we can move into the actual story with these changes. First thing to address is the team names, which to make things simple will be Team Victory and Team Amazon. After that, Chris gives out the rewards and Team Victory gets a stick, while Team Amazon gets a goat. Of course, Victory is very confused as to why they just get a stick after winning, but Chris has his ways. Also, I left out the camel because I'm sure Chris would find it funny to do a camel race with no camels. Plus, the camel was the 3rd place reward and there is no 3rd team in this one, so it just fits the best. Anyway, for the race to the Nile, both teams would be kinda lost. Amazon was lost in the show, and so was Victory, and plus they're on foot. But after Harold breaks the stick and finds out it's a divining rod, they're able to find the Nile slightly faster than Team Amazon. With Alejandro to lead Team Victory the right way, the 8 of them would arrive at the 3rd challenge first, even though they're on foot. And with Sierra and Izzy already on the same team as Cody and Owen, there's no need for them to swap, so they all 4 just stay on the same team. Weaving continues, with Team Amazon pulling ahead due to Sierra's crazy weaving skills. And because they have a goat instead of a camel, they're able to pick it up and put it in their boat a lot quicker. So Team Amazon just kind of slams Team Victory with little effort. And luckily Team Victory doesn't have Ezekiel, so they're able to have someone else hold onto the stick. Because both teams crossed with their past rewards, there is no elimination that night, as Chris had said in the original episode. So with the introductory episodes out of the way, let's talk about some of the dynamics we'd have with these new teams. For starters, most of Team Chris is really hot. Dynamics will be the same, just without Owen and Izzy. They also have all of Team Victory minus Ezekiel, so that's going to be identical to the show. But Alejandro being on the team that's the most susceptible to his tactics is going to make things a lot harder for him. I don't see him throwing challenges, as he liked to having his team members be strong and loyal to him to help crush the other teams. So he'll have to play into that more in this version and use his charm on his own team to strengthen their loyalty. As for Amazon, they've stayed the exact same, just with some members of the original Victory and Chris teams mixed in. But Owen is good friends with Gwen and Cody, so that's pretty good. Ezekiel is definitely going to be the odd man out on this team, but let's hope they win a lot for his sake. With that out of the way, let's now move on to episode 3. When they have to play pinball, the chosen player for Team Victory would be Alejandro. As for Team Amazon, it seemed like none of the original members wanted to do it, so I could totally see Ezekiel stepping up to prove himself for his team. Both Alejandro and Ezekiel get into the balls with pandas in them, and Ezekiel just gets beat up by it while Alejandro charms it like he does in the show. Alejandro is able to easily win the challenge with the helps of the panda, while Ezekiel tries his best but fails. As for the commercial part of the challenge, Harold wants to put his vision of the lone samurai into effect, but Alejandro was able to combine that with his own idea. The result is DJ playing the big monster, which he kind of fails at, while the rest of them play civilians, except for the samurai, Harold, who offers the monster a Yum Yum Happy Go Time candy fishtail to end his hunger. Meanwhile, Gwen, Heather, and Courtney's bickering leads to Owen, Ezekiel, Izzy, Sierra, and Cody having to make the commercial themselves. The 5 are able to make the original one, but even better and crazier, with the additional help of Owen and Izzy. Ezekiel kind of fumbles on some of his lines, but Chef still gives them the win since DJ did the same on Team Victory. Plus, as he said, the exploding donuts really sell it for him. Because of their loss, Team Victory now has to vote someone off. They heavily consider DJ since he messed up on the challenge. Bridget might mention how DJ is very strong, and actually saved the Killer Bass back in Total Drama Island. Alejandro takes this information and decides to talk to Harold like he did in the show. He can tell that Harold isn't very useful to him, and he's kind of annoyed with him correcting everyone all the time. So he tells him about his honor and stuff, and this causes Harold to eliminate himself like he did in the show. This saves DJ. Fourth episode sees a few things staying the same, but with some differences. Alejandro probably isn't going to make Bridget swoon as much since they're on the same team, just enough to get their loyalty, so he wouldn't leave her. This means we wouldn't get that banger song, which is very unfortunate. Because there are only 2 teams, Tyler and Izzy would just join up with their respective teams instead of getting on their own sled. Team Victory has 1 less member, and Lashana's plan of all of them going straight to the finish line and getting picked up takes place. Due to those factors, I think they'd be able to win this challenge, so Team Amazon would have to boot someone, which I think would probably be Ezekiel, just because he likely would have made some dumb mistake during the challenge. Yeah, Heather is an option, but they know she's a really strong player, so they can keep her around for now. It's best to get rid of the people holding them back. Although, Gwen does agree to help Courtney vote off Heather next time. So Ezekiel is the 3rd elimination, which sucks for him, but oh well. This is World Tour, so you know it's not going to be the last of him we see. And especially not in this What If. For the next episode, the cast goes to New York, which causes some more interesting changes to emerge. Team Amazon is now forced to deal with pulling Owen up the Statue of Victory, which is a hefty task, especially due to nobody on their team being particularly strong. Team Victory has Tyler get the giant apple, while Amazon has Sierra do it, but Heather's sabotage causes Victory to fall short. Team Amazon wins the reward, and the first Aftermath show is almost entirely different as Bridget never fully cheated on Jeff. Plus, she's still in the game, so they'd only be able to interview Harold, as Duncan and Ezekiel are both missing. But Blanley would definitely make sure to have a segment discussing whether or not Bridget will keep falling for Alejandro. Other than that, it's a pretty boring episode, so let's go on to episode 7. In this one, our teams go to the Alps, where they must make giant sausages to ride down a mountain. But since both teams have more players, they'd have to make 2 sausages each, so that way there would be enough to ride. I know what you're all thinking, but please stop. Team Victory is able to make 2 good sausages, while Team Amazon has Izzy messing around, Sierra trying to make meat Cody's, and Owen eating one of the sausage, so they're just having a terrible time. The remaining sausage is messed up, but they jump on it and turn it into a snowboard. The other half of the team just rides on Owen like Team Chris did canonically. While these strategies allow Team Amazon to get close, Team Victory is too far in the lead, so this allows them to win the helmets for the slap challenge. The matchups for this challenge would have to change quite a bit, so I'm going to describe how here. Cody versus Alejandro and DJ versus Sierra can stay the same, but Noah and Lashana are on the same team now, and so are Heather and Owen. So we just have Noah versus Heather and Lashana versus Owen instead. By the end of the first round, Alejandro, Sierra, Heather, and Lashana have all won. So the final rounds are the same, with Lashana jumping off to beat the brakes off of Heather. But since she's on his team, Alejandro can't afford to lose for Heather, so he continues the slap fight against Sierra, which is a close one to call. We see that Sierra has some crazy strength when she's really determined many times throughout the series, but Al is pretty strong. However, when I think of who would win in this scenario, it's gotta be Sierra. Alejandro just doesn't show off the same power that Sierra does often, so I've gotta give it to her. So now Team Victory has to vote off another of its members. Noah and Tyler consider Lashana, as she did throw the challenge, but Alejandro can't really come up with another expendable option. So he tries to convince Bridget to vote Lashana as well, which works because of his charm. With 4 votes out of 7, Lashana gets the boot, and we use our boots to walk to the next episode. I don't know, man. In the Amazon race, most things would remain the same, except our new Team Victory would get the advantages Lindsay and DJ received. Or they might not get any since there's only 2 teams. Luckily for Team Amazon, they've got Izzy on their team, so when they encounter the Zing Zings, she'd probably try and fight them, and since they're revealed to just be actors, she would probably slap them up. This allows Team Amazon to catch up with Team Victory, which prevents both Gwen being stabbed by Cody's EpiPen and Heather getting a golden tooth. But because Owen isn't on his team, Alejandro can't leave him behind, so Team Victory wouldn't have any drawbacks and can just win the challenge. Chris still reveals the votes of the losing team, causing Sierra to have a meltdown because of Cody voting for her. But nobody goes home. For the next episode, the teams have to piece together their statues in the Louvre. DJ still runs off to the Egypt exhibit to try and fix his curse before accidentally crashing into his team's statue due to the animals attacking him. So Team Amazon wins, which leads to a normal voting elimination instead of the challenge between Lindsay and DJ. Here, it would be very clear DJ fumbled the bag, so just about everyone would be down to vote him off. And DJ wants to leave anyway, now that there's no chance of him fixing his curse, so that's that. Without him carrying his own team, there wouldn't be the whole subplot of Alejandro and Heather attempting to ally him. Heather tries to stop Courtney and Gwen from chasing after what looks like Duncan in the next challenge, but this just causes a fight which holds Team Amazon back. So Team Victory wins the first part of the challenge. And since Chris needs some clams shucked ASAP, it just means Team Amazon would be found and forced to do that as a punishment, while Team Victory earns the reward. The next episode, the plane crash lands the cast in Jamaica. Owen and Izzy still get crushed by the plane, and Izzy becomes Brainzilla before being taken by the military. Bridget is totally ready for the shark dives and probably finds the gold chain pretty quickly, since she's a very experienced surfer. Owen returns from the infirmary in time to rejoin Team Amazon for the next part of the challenge. Since Team Victory has the helmets from winning the first part, I'm pretty sure they'd take the W here. Especially since Owen is now holding Team Amazon back, not Victory. This puts us in a very interesting position, as now Team Amazon has to vote someone off. Since we know Gwen, Sierra, and Courtney were all planning to vote off Heather, it would likely happen here. Maybe. See, Cody and Owen are friends based on some scenes that they've shared together, so I think Cody might see this as an opportunity to get rid of Sierra and could ask Owen for help. But because Owen has realized not to take his own crazy girl for granted, I think he'd probably choose not to vote for Sierra in the end. This means we'd have a 2-4 vote between Sierra and Heather, so Heather actually does get the boot here after all. For the next Aftermath episode, Blanley would be Jeff's only co-host, as Bridget is still in the game, which is very good for her. Lindsay is also not going to be featured for the same reason. Other than that, everything remains the same. The next episode is I See London, which would have a few changes that make it a little interesting. For starters, Team Amazon has Owen instead of Heather, but I doubt Gwen and Courtney could force him to get onto the rack. So they'd probably try and then fail, so Courtney would be forced to get on the stretch rack, or they would try and trick Owen to think there's food inside or something. I don't know. Either way, someone's getting stretched. As for Victory, Noah would probably open up about his suspicions of Alejandro to Tyler instead of Owen. He also tries to get Bridget and Lindsay to understand how they're wrapped around Al's finger, but they don't really listen. With Bridget being a super caring person and Lindsay liking Tyler, I doubt they leave him behind this time. Meanwhile, on Team Amazon, Gwen and Courtney would likely have Owen distract the corgis like Noah did, but the two would still go off and accidentally find Duncan instead of Jack the Ripper. However, without Owen and the corgis, Team Victory would be out of luck when it comes to capturing Jack. I honestly doubt Bridget, Lindsay, Noah, and Tyler could do it, and they'd probably just get picked off one by one. After all of Team Victory is captured and Team Amazon returns to the plane with Duncan, Jack the Ripper shows up. Everyone gets super scared, but he is revealed to have been Ezekiel the entire time, and because of what Chris said in the show about letting him back if he avoids capture, that means he's back in the game. Now that could have been a lie, but I'm just gonna say it isn't to spice things up. See, I told you guys Ezekiel would be returning at some point. And here, Team Amazon winning makes more sense, as they avoided capture and caught Duncan. So Chris returns the half-feral Ezekiel to Team Amazon and gives Duncan to Team Victory, who now has to vote someone off. Because Al controls almost all of the team, Noah would get the boot, as he did originally. Now we're gonna use our boots. Yo, who wrote this? In the next episode, the cast travels to Greece. During the wrestling challenge, Owen being on Team Amazon would be a major asset. It means Tyler and whoever else is helping him would be completely obliterated, giving Amazon the win. With Heather gone, Ezekiel would have to replace her against Alejandro in the final challenge, but Al wouldn't throw it like he does canonically because it isn't Heather. This means Team Amazon now has 3 medals and Victory has 1, so there's no need for a tiebreaker, and Team Victory needs to vote someone off again. This also means Al doesn't need a distraction for Team Amazon, so Tyler doesn't reveal the kiss between Duncan and Gwen. Team Victory basically unanimously agrees to vote off Duncan, but Chris isn't gonna allow that. On the other hand, Chris also isn't just gonna ignore the votes this time, as we are at 11 people instead of the original 9. So we've got to do something about that. The only person who didn't vote for Duncan is, well, Duncan. So who does he vote for? It's a toss-up, as he doesn't really like Tyler, he knows Lindsay is a liability, but I think he can recognize he's not in the best of odds right now. So having someone on the team who actually dislikes him because of previous events in the series would be bad, and that's why I think he would vote for Bridget, and because Chris is desperate to cut someone, he allows that one vote to take her out. It's definitely unfair, but a lot of eliminations in the show are, and this is just what I think the most likely choice is. But at least Bridget can now host the Aftermath with Jeff. In the next episode, Alejandro decides to have Tyler reveal the kiss in order to throw Team Amazon off their game. This leads to a super emotionally unstable Courtney, who causes trouble for Gwen. Owen would probably get exploded in the minefield and taken out of commission for a while. Lindsay would also get taken by aliens instead of Owen. Courtney tries to make her team lose so that she can vote off Gwen, but I think they would still take the dub at the end. And this means that Tyler would get voted off due to his injuries from the landmine. Owen is also injured pretty badly, but characters heal quickly in the show, so we're just gonna let him slide with that. During the emu race in Australia, Ezekiel would be able to run on all fours and still keep up with his team. However, Owen is gonna have even more trouble catching up due to his injuries. His team would be allowed to go back and get him this time since he's injured though. This means Team Victory gets the advantage of the electric razor and can start grabbing sheep first. With both of these advantages, Alejandro, Duncan, and Lindsay are able to win the challenge pretty easily. Also, I'm pretty sure throughout the episode, we'd see Gwen and Courtney awkwardly trying to get Ezekiel to vote with them, even though he's kind of just riding alone at the moment. The votes on Team Amazon would be more split this time, as Owen's injuries did hold them back quite a bit. Gwen would easily get Owen to help her vote out Courtney, since they were cool in the first season. I think Ezekiel would vote Owen, Cody would still vote Sierra, with Owen and Gwen voting Courtney, while Courtney and Sierra vote Gwen. Sorry about the huge tongue twister, but yeah, you should be able to see it on screen. This leads to that same eucalyptus tiebreaker, which Gwen loses. It's time for our teams to go to Sweden. I feel like Lindsay would definitely hold Alejandro and Duncan back in the boat building challenge, causing them to have a messed up boat. However, Duncan wouldn't learn not to trust Alejandro since Owen and Noah never talked about that. Owen also wouldn't cause all the ice to crack since he's not holding in farts because he isn't worried about Alejandro. He's not even on the same team as the guy. Al would offer up the captain spot to Lindsay to try and keep her head in the game, and she is totally cool with that because she actually enjoyed leading her team in Total Drama Action. Ezekiel steals the captain helmet for Team Amazon, and the team is too afraid and weirded out by him to really stop him. So basically, he's the captain now. Without Owen to launch at Team Amazon, Team Victory would lose once more, but it's a reward challenge, and in the next episode, Blanley gets a reward by getting thrown back into Total Drama. That means we've got 9 people at the merge instead of 8, but there are enough episodes where we can cut enough people. So, with the teams merged, Chris decides to pair everyone up using the random wheel. Now, since they have an extra guy, I'm just gonna say Chris brought a female bear instead of a male bear. That way, we can pair one of the guys with her. So we'd probably have the guys spinning instead of the girls here. I'm gonna keep as many canon couples intact as possible, as there are still some here. So we've still got Cody and Sierra, Duncan and Courtney, and Owen and Blanley. This leaves Lindsay, Ezekiel, and Alejandro, so one of them has to get a bear. Now, while it would be funny to put Ezekiel with a bear, I think we get more character interactions if we put him with Lindsay. It's more interesting to have him actually interact with the others than to shove him off to the side. Usually he never makes it this far. So Ezekiel gets Lindsay, which he's kinda down with, and Lindsay's a little weirded out, but I'm sure she'd find him to not be all that bad. This leaves Alejandro with a bear, whom he's able to woo like the other animals. This allows him to win the challenge pretty easily, and assist Courtney as well. Due to Ezekiel's slowly fading English and Lindsay's stupidity, they'd be completely failing. Chris would announce the challenge is about to end, and Sierra would start dashing toward her dress. This, combined with Ezekiel realizing they're going to be disqualified, forces him to muster up all his fortitude and say the directions Lindsay needs to go. Everyone is shocked that he can still speak, and the two narrowly escape their L. Lindsay is really happy that he was able to help them win, and so she probably gives him a hug or something, which makes Ezekiel feel really wanted. The next part of the challenge would go pretty similarly, but I think Ezekiel being kind of feral would definitely help him whilst carrying Lindsay. He'd probably pull out some crazy running skills, jumping over the other contestants, and gaining immunity for both him and Lindsay. It'd be close between Duncan and Courtney, but I think Ezekiel has it here. So, who gets voted off? Well, it's kinda similar to in canon. Alejandro still gets Duncan and Sierra to vote off Owen, but I think Ezekiel would sense something is off about Alejandro. I mean, he's been on the plane watching this whole time whilst being eliminated, so he would definitely notice Al trying to talk to Lindsay, but would probably pull her back to first class and not let Al talk to her. Lindsay is Ezekiel's first real friend in the series, so he doesn't want her being played by Al. And yes, Ezekiel is kinda nuts, but we saw in the London episode that he can be very strategic because of his newfound skills. So I think he's still at that stage. And of course, befriending Lindsay has only helped him to be more human. Courtney votes for Duncan, Ezekiel votes for Al. Lindsay and Owen's votes really don't matter unless they vote for Sierra or Owen, as I think the two would have the most votes, but I don't think Chris would boot them both yet, so we'd have another tiebreaker challenge. We can make it like a questionnaire type thing, since Chef had to ask questions earlier in the episode. And obviously Sierra would crush Owen at this, causing him to be kicked out literally by Alejandro. In the Chinese race, Lindsay would be left with the weird sandals Heather wore and likely wouldn't make it to the finish by the time Chris rings the gong. Ezekiel wouldn't need a ride as he's got the speed of his feet. As for the eating contest, Ezekiel might be pretty good at it and make it past the first round. I'd even wager to say he makes it to the final round, but because Sierra gets Blanley's ice cream, she'd still win and get immunity. Now as for the elimination, we've got pretty much the same votes. Cody wastes his on Sierra despite her being immune, and Ezekiel would vote for Alejandro again. This leaves us with a 3-3 on Courtney and Blanley, so Chris boots them both due to the producers pressuring him. Now with Ezekiel being part of the cast, he wouldn't be what the gang are hunting in the next episode. Well, kind of. I think it would be really likely that Chris makes them hunt each other. The last one to be paralyzed with the trank ball wins immunity. Ezekiel would fail at getting his gourd open, so he'd only get one trank ball. Lindsay might also only get one here. Duncan and Al still team up, while Sierra plays for both her and Cody. And of course, Lindsay and Ezekiel team up as well. So we've got 3 partnered teams. Sierra would be on the hunt, finding Lindsay and Ezekiel roaming. She takes a shot at Lindsay, but Ezekiel senses it and saves her from it. He then gets up as Sierra tries to prepare the last trank ball. Zeke points at Sierra and Lindsay goes to shoot, but messes up and hits herself. After that, Ezekiel is able to escape and Sierra chases after. That leads to Duncan and Alejandro tagging Cody and Sierra with their balls. Jeez. Anyway, Cody and Sierra are knocked out, so Alejandro and Duncan continue their teamwork to try and hunt Zeke. We'd get to see them working together more rather than Al trying to manipulate Duncan. They need each other if they're going to beat this guy. So they work together, but I think Duncan would get taken out, either by Zeke or with Zeke by Al in one hit. Either way, Alejandro takes down Ezekiel and wins immunity by being the last one standing. For the voting, we've got some changes due to Heather not being here, and Alejandro having different ideas on who's a threat. See, he saw Duncan as the biggest threat in this episode, but you have to remember that Ezekiel was able to take out the entire cast back in London. And he's been really good in challenges lately. Plus, he's caught on to Al's schemes and is probably gunning for him. So, Al decides to take action on Ezekiel first. He convinces Duncan pretty easily as it means Al isn't voting him off, so why would Duncan deny that? I do think Sierra holds enough of a grudge against Duncan to vote him off still. He hurt Cody and cheated on Courtney, so she doesn't like him that much. Due to Ezekiel not being able to vote for Al, since he's got that invincibility, he votes for Duncan as well. As for Lindsay, she would probably also vote for Duncan here because who else would she vote for? And this means Alejandro's plan fails and Duncan is voted off just like in the original. This is not good for Al, as now he's alone against Ezekiel. Or is he? Well, due to his victory, he is allowed to bring one person into first class with him. While he did bring Cody canonically, it was only because there were no other options to take out Heather. Well, besides Sierra, but yeah. Though, things are a bit different this time. Lindsay has been loyal to him since the beginning, but her bond with Ezekiel is growing more each day. He's got to find some way to turn her against him. It's his only hope at stopping them from targeting him eventually. Sierra would likely vote off Ezekiel anyway if Alejandro wasn't the choice. So all he needs to do is win immunity and make sure Lindsay votes for Ezekiel, and it'll be wraps for him. So Al spends the night in first class with Lindsay and returns to his usual flirting and whatnot. However, he has lost quite a bit of his charm due to her remembering Tyler. Not to mention, Zeke has been influencing her. But based on her still repping Al in the last few episodes, I'd assume she still likes him to some degree. And if he can convince her that he cared for Tyler a lot, maybe he could pull her back around. Anyway, we've now got a pretty different final 5, so things could get interesting in these last few episodes. In the next one, the gang travels to Easter Island, where they have to find colored condor eggs. Alejandro giving Lindsay the candy he won wouldn't be all that effective, but it is still appreciated. The basket is useful for the challenge, and Lindsay does like that he's being nice and helping her. Ezekiel tries to warn Lindsay, but she tells him that she can be friends with both of them. Alejandro then walks up to one of Lindsay's eggs, handing it to her, which ticks Ezekiel off. He runs to go find his own eggs to try and win the challenge. Lindsay is able to gather her eggs quickly due to Al and Zeke helping her out. I imagine Ezekiel would find the eggs before Alejandro though, causing Al to have to catch up with him. And due to Ezekiel's quick thinking and instincts, he and Lindsay would dodge the boulder, causing Alejandro to have an egg or two crushed. He has no basket to hold them in, so he's much more vulnerable. Al then has to run back, causing him to fall behind greatly. He narrowly escapes the condor, but is now the middle person to make it back. So we'd get a weird order in the condor song: Ezekiel, Lindsay, Alejandro, Cody, and lastly Sierra. Ezekiel would definitely not be welcomed by the mother condor and would not win. Lindsay might fail, but she's got the basket, so she'd get a second try. Alejandro would get pecked by the condor, but he didn't win the mask, so he'd be dropped earlier from that. Sierra and Cody both fail still too. This leaves Lindsay as the only one with any eggs left, so if she can return them, she wins. Ezekiel offers her the mask he won since he's out, and she takes it. Cody too isn't attracted to Heather this time since she's not here, so it'd probably be Lindsay instead. He hops onto her hair, and the condor flies off with him, allowing Lindsay to win the challenge and invincibility. The votes end up kinda split, but luckily it was just a reward challenge. Don't worry, we're still gonna have time to cut the extra characters off, just wait. For now, Lindsay and Ezekiel enjoy first class together. Even though he's not in first class, I think Al can Photoshop the image of Cody and Sierra since the computer was in a different part of the plane. The only real option is to make it look like Cody was sleeping next to Lindsay. This would make Sierra mad and have her act out against Lindsay, causing her to not like Sierra either. Then if Al and Cody vote for Sierra, she's gone. After that, he can use Cody's loyalty to help him further. This basically plays out as you'd expect, and the cast make their dinosaurs in Alberta. I think the dinosaur Sierra makes would still get the most votes, with Cody or Lindsay being second. So I'd give Sierra the drill, Lindsay or Cody the pick or pail and shovel, with Ezekiel and Al nothing. Sierra still wins the challenge, and Al would probably end up saving Lindsay from being wedged in a hole. Not sure what the song would be like there, but it's probably not as cool. All the votes come in, or they would if Sierra didn't accidentally blow up the plane, which she still does here. She is eliminated by Chris himself, who then leaves in a helicopter. The remaining 4 now have to find their way to Hawaii somehow, and the last 2 to show up get the boot. The final Aftermath challenge would have 4 teams since there are 4 players. Ezekiel would likely only have Blanley on his team since no one really likes him. Owen would be forced to surf with the injured Blanley, Tyler would surf for Lindsay, and Harold and Courtney would still surf for Cody and Al. Still see Harold winning though, so not much changes besides Tyler getting some more screen time. Anyway, the final 4 begin their travels, with Alejandro sneaking into Chris's animal truck and Cody making the hot air balloon. I imagine Lindsay and Ezekiel would just roam around until they find the train. This causes their paths to converge with Alejandro once he hops on the train as well. We would then see an epic showdown between Al and Zeke as they battle to try and leave each other behind. But Al is able to make use of Ezekiel's bond with Lindsay, making him believe she was going to fall off the train. He then knocks Ezekiel off the train and continues traveling, but Lindsay sees him enter and asks where Ezekiel is. Al lies, saying that he wanted some alone time. The stress of the competition is eating at him. Lindsay feels bad for her friend until Ezekiel eventually returns on a horse, hopping onto the train again. Lindsay realizes that Alejandro lied, and Ezekiel is able to knock him off the train this time since he's not distracted. But Al lands on one of the horses, still trying to keep up. Sierra and Cody's whole firework explosion goes the same, causing them to land in a boat, and Lindsay gets to the other one as well, with Ezekiel hopping into another one. Alejandro arrives last, but due to Lindsay being unable to figure out how to start the boat, he quickly passes her and Ezekiel. So Ezekiel hops into her boat to try and figure it out, and eventually does so. The sword fight between Al and Cody keeps them distracted long enough for Zeke and Lindsay to catch up in their one boat, but because Lindsay is using Heather's original boat, it runs out of fuel after passing them, forcing Ezekiel to push it while swimming. Lindsay also rows the boat to give it an extra push. Alejandro's boat blows up on a mine, and the explosion somewhat hits Lindsay's boat, causing her to be launched forward while Ezekiel is blown back since he's in the water. Al and Cody's boats collide, making them land at the same time, tied with Lindsay. This means Ezekiel is eliminated, and we're down to our final 3. Because Alejandro was basically a one-man show that whole way, I think Chris would allow him the guaranteed spot in the final 2. However, it comes at the cost with him being hit by all the golf balls to decide the next challenge, and he has to get tied up like Heather and risk burning alive, so it's kind of fair. This means Lindsay and Cody have to battle on the raft for who makes it to the final 2. This would be a really cool fight, as both have kind of been carried by other people, so seeing them fight alone for who takes on the main antagonist in the finale is cool. Honestly, I could see this fight going either way. Alejandro could distract Cody by saying Sierra got hurt, or mention that there's a sale on mascara or something. It's really a toss-up. So I'm just gonna say that either one could win, meaning we technically have 3 different winners of the season due to alternate endings. Lindsay won, her helpers would be Tyler and Ezekiel. If Cody won, Sierra really can't help much due to her injuries, so it'd probably be Harold and Ezekiel. But for Al, he's gonna need a new helper, as Lindsay is in the final 2. Or even in the ending where Cody's in the final 2 instead of her, she definitely isn't helping him win now because she knows who he is. Maybe Heather could help him since she had a crush on him, but she'll only do it if he gives her some of the money. I don't know. But it would be cool to see Heather and Courtney forced to work together again. Probably wouldn't end too well. The endings would probably go something like this. Alejandro's ending sees him offer to go on a date with Heather before tossing the sacrifice into the lava. Heather can't really betray him since she wants him to win due to their deal. Cody's ending would have Ezekiel attack Alejandro, distracting him long enough for Cody or Lindsay to throw their sacrifice in. I know the helpers didn't do anything at the end of the canon version, but it's the only realistic thing I can think of to give more than one ending.
Ezekiel makes his first appearance in episode 7 where he steals 2 Gilded Chris statues and leads an army of mutant gophers. So without him there, we just have Chris sending the team down to retrieve the statues in their normal spot and then drop the bombs to get rid of the gophers. The first change arises when Anne-Maria, Scott, and Zoe get separated from Mike and Cameron and fall into the mine water. Anne-Maria would want to beat down Scott for falling on her, but both Zoe and Scott would manage to convince her that they should just leave the water. Ezekiel is not present, so he never pounces on Anne-Maria, which means she stays with the two. They end up reuniting with Mike and Cameron, while mutant gophers chase Brick, Joe, and Lightning. But because they're not being led by Ezekiel, the gophers wouldn't just grab them and hold everyone. They'd probably try and maul them. So I could see Brick being attacked while Lightning and Joe leave him behind as part of their guys pact. The mutant maggots find the Gilded Chris statues and also find a few mutant gophers. Lightning and Joe arrive as well, but Joe is able to use the fireflies to distract the gophers, allowing Lightning to grab a statue. Brick then returns, having barely made it out, and everyone drops their packs. Lightning, Joe, and Brick then hop onto the minecarts because Ezekiel isn't there to hold Lightning down. Mike grabs a statue but sees Zoe and Cam in trouble and tosses it to Scott, who then throws it away, making it land in Anne-Maria's hair. The rats then depart, with Scott jumping in as well and saying hi to his old team. They escape and Chris makes an announcement to the rest of the maggots that they had better leave immediately or he's detonating the bombs with them inside. And so, Anne-Maria gets furious and beats up the gophers that attack Mike, Zoe, and Cameron, and they just slide down the minecart tracks. This means that the toxic rats win, and the maggots were really close to getting too much radiation in their systems. Scott realizes he's in trouble as he literally left his team to die, but I think him being on edge would lead to him overhearing Mike tell Cameron about his personality disorder. He also hears the part where Cameron tells him that they should vote off Scott, so Scott approaches Cameron, revealing that he knows about Mike's disorder and threatening to tell Zoe. Cam begs him not to, and Scott agrees only if he tells Mike to vote off Anne-Maria instead. Cameron agrees to this and tells Mike to do so. Their votes, combined with Scott's and probably Zoe's because she doesn't like Anne-Maria, lead to Anne-Maria being eliminated, but Brick stays in. This also means that Dakota will be joining the toxic rats, as she only joined the maggots because Anne-Maria quit. But here she got voted out in a normal way, so Chris would want to even out the teams. So now it's 4-4, and that's nice. In the next episode, Dakotazoid being on the other team would help a decent bit. All 4 of the mutant maggots would be rowing/pushing the raft, so they wouldn't encounter Fang. Instead, Dakotazoid would throw the sign from the toxic rats and punch the Kraken thing, saving them. This means that the maggots still win, giving them the map and compass. Chris wouldn't be able to lock Dakotazoid up with the shackles, so she gets off scot-free. Dakota wouldn't be there to save the mutant maggots from the mutant crocodile, so they'd take longer, allowing the rats to catch up. However, I imagine Mike would probably lose his shirt in the water and turn into Vito, so he's able to fend it off long enough for them to run away. Brick and the others find their keys, so they unlock themselves. The rats still win because Joe and Brick were able to find Sam and Gwen. And so the maggots would still have to vote someone off, but not Dakotazoid since she's on the other team. In canon, Scott got the most votes, but he had the immunity idol. this would still be the case. And while Scott was trying to soften Zoe up to him, it wouldn't work out as well because he's not helping her get away from Dakota. And plus, her only options are Mike, the guy she likes, Cameron, the really nice guy, or the shady, cowardly guy. This leaves Scott's vote as the single vote that matters on his team, and he doesn't want to get rid of Mike because he can blackmail him by threatening to tell Zoe about his disorder. But in order to do that, that means Zoe has to stay around too, and that leaves only one person as expendable. Cameron really has no use for him as he's only blackmailing him about telling Mike that he told him about his disorder, but he could just cut out the middleman and threaten Mike directly. So Cam gets voted off here. One of the winners of the season is eliminated simply because Ezekiel isn't there for one episode. That's crazy. But I think after Chris tells Sam that it's time to go, Dakota Zoid would want to go with him as she doesn't really care about the fame anymore. So Dakota and Sam hop in the catapult with Cameron and they all get hurled. In the episode, they never actually say that Sam is going to stay around, and if he did, I'd have both him and Dakota as extra players. And honestly, that's just too much for only 5 episodes left. So I think we'll just go with the assumption that Sam wasn't going to return. For the next episode, Scott would be working his magic with Mike, while Lightning and Joe have their little alliance. This leaves Zoe feeling like Mike and Scott are both being jerks to her, so Brick kinda steps in to keep her spirits high and be a good friend. They'd have a pretty similar dynamic to Cameron and Zoe canonically. As for the challenge, Cameron had a pretty big lead on most people, but lost it because he wanted to paint a huge picture. Brick wouldn't do this, probably, but he'd lose his lead saving Zoe from falling, which puts Scott ahead before he uses Vito to give him a tow up the mountain. He then knocks Vito out and gets the W like he did in canon. Mike fights his personalities for control, then reveals the truth to Zoe and Brick, but it's too late as Scott eliminates Mike himself. Next episode, Joe is on her own because there's no Cameron, and Brick already stopped trying to bond with her. He's more chill with Zoe now. And since he's not all that smart, he's not able to give Lightning the idea of using a fan, which was crucial to building his helicopter. And honestly, I don't think Brick is smart enough to build a rocket. Joe might be the smartest of the three, and has a pretty easy thing to build, the hot air balloon, which we saw Sierra and Cody be able to do. But with Brick and Lightning both being clueless and fighting over stuff, she'd also be involved in the arguing. So it's mainly just Scott versus Zoe, with maybe Brick or Joe involved slightly, but Zoe is pretty much easily winning. She becomes the queen of the flying goats and orders them to burn down the Zeppelin, stopping Heather from stealing the $1 million. With Lightning and Brick both disliking Joe, she'd be the one getting voted off here still, but Joe somewhat respects Brick for actually standing up to her. Scott would try to make a fake alliance with Zoe, make a real alliance with Lightning, and convince Brick that Zoe wanted to vote off Lightning. Brick wouldn't be able to cook nearly as good as Cameron, but would probably still have better food than Scott, so he'd still swap them, giving him the win for the first part. Brick tries to stick with Zoe, but gets separated due to Chef catching them, so we still get Commando Zoe here. But since Cameron isn't there to short out the neck bracelets and put them on a mutant raccoon, Chef wouldn't be that far behind. This allows him to stop Lightning before he can beat Zoe to the finish line, so Zoe wins once more. It doesn't really matter though, as I don't think Brick would vote for Lightning. He'd probably vote Scott like Cameron did. As for Lightning, he might vote for Brick, making it a tie between him and Scott, but Scott was heavily injured, so Chris would either just choose Scott anyway, or Scott would lose whatever tiebreaker there was because he's injured. So sadly, Ezekiel's lack of presence does not save Scott from 4th place. But it does make things going forward interesting as Brick and Zoe make a pact to body Lightning in the second to last challenge, with Brick following Zoe's lead and respecting her attitude due to his background in the military. At a certain point, he realizes that Zoe is a little too focused on beating Lightning and not on the team working together, but he pushes it to the side mostly, as she's really strong and it's useful. Because Brick is way more physically adept than Cameron, he's able to keep up and not really lag behind like he did. This means that Zoe doesn't get held back, so she wins yet again, allowing her to eliminate Lightning. This leads to the finale, where Zoe is far too focused on victory and ignores her bond with Brick. He's now realized that she's gone off the deep end and lost her way, and so he hopes that he can hopefully get her back. They each get a short talk with a family member like the original 2 finalists did, and for Brick, it's likely his mother since he mentions the letters home to mom badges. She'd encourage him to do the right thing and fight on like he always does. As for Zoe's person, they'd be surprised to see Zoe look so angry and serious, and would try to get her to remember who she was before. Anyway, Zoe and Brick are forced to fight against one of their only friends. This would be a really cool fight because we've seen Commando Zoe in action before, and she's awesome. Brick would also probably use a similar brute strength style to Lightning, but would also employ better military tactics since he knows about them. The fight between them would honestly be pretty pitched, allowing for the endings to be pretty satisfying narratively as well. For Brick's ending, you could have him trying to get through to Zoe. This works, leading to her relenting and giving Brick the victory because he followed his code of never leaving a man behind, whereas she forgot her friendship. But in Zoe's ending, she would defeat Brick, but go a little too far, so she realizes her mistakes and promises to give Brick some of the money. And wow, look at all the changes made just by Ezekiel not showing up in one episode. For starters, some of you who saw the revenge video might be wondering if Brick will be in this All-Stars season, since he was a hypothetical winner. But remember that Owen and Beth didn't compete in All-Stars, although they both won a season, and Owen did make a cameo. So Brick doesn't have to compete just for winning, although it would be interesting. But in order to keep things as close to what if Ezekiel was in All-Stars as possible, I'm not going to include him. Instead, we'll still have Cameron, even though he didn't make it to the merge, but Sam got voted out before he did, and he's still in All-Stars for some reason, so we can just go with it here. Maybe one day I'll make a video putting Brick into this season if you guys want to see it. We're also not going to be replacing anyone with Ezekiel, we're just going to add him to the cast, which means we'll need an extra elimination at some point. But keep in mind that Chris's joke had Ezekiel tacked on, so that's why I'm pretty much just tacking him onto the cast. A final note before we start, remember that this is a what if, not a complete rewrite, so I'm going to be sticking as closely to what I think would realistically play out, not just what I want to happen. Starting off with episode 1, despite Ezekiel's rough appearance, his actions and friendship with Lindsay definitely make him more of a hero than a villain, so he's going to be on the heroic hamsters. But this means that the heroes now have 8 members to the villain 6, so Chris gives the villains the robot. It's still 8v7, but after the first challenge it won't matter much. Oh yeah, Ezekiel can now talk again since he's been working on getting his human capabilities back over the time between seasons. Courtney volunteers Lindsay for driving the cart, but Ezekiel offers to do it instead. Courtney doesn't like Ezekiel at all, but he's also kind of a beast, so she doesn't argue with him. Ezekiel is able to keep the heroes from falling behind since he'd be more used to running far than Lindsay, and would probably let Courtney out of the carriage instead of letting someone jump on top of her. Probably. Lindsay struggles finding a key in the water, which leads to them losing once Alejandro breaks out of the robot suit with the correct key. And so the heroes still lose, but Ezekiel being there prevents Lindsay from voting herself off since they're friends. Sadly, Lindsay failing at finding a key is what put them so far behind, so I don't see her making it past the first episode. Courtney is annoying, but she isn't super cruel in the first episode, so I don't see them voting her off. So rest in peace, Lindsay. In episode 2, the heroes originally won, and now they have an additional person, so they win even quicker. Lightning gets voted off by the villains, and Sam goes to Boney Island. Ezekiel doesn't bring Sam breakfast the next day just because I don't think he'd really care. He's kinda mad everyone got rid of Lindsay. Sierra and Ezekiel would probably end up being pals since they both got far in season 3 and at least have that in common. Ezekiel once again helps to obliterate the villains in episode 3, and they already did bad in canon, so he'd easily help take them down. He probably takes down Joe before she shows up in the cave, so the heroes win before Courtney uses Sam as a shield. Ezekiel chooses to go to Boney Island, as he doesn't really have many friends, and plus he's used to roughing it out with the animals due to his time on the plane and world tour. As for the vote, it's still Joe, as nothing much changed. I don't think we'd have a team swap though, since Courtney didn't use Sam as a shield. Sure, she'd stayed behind while everyone else fought, but that's about it. Not worth swapping yet. And because there's no team swap, that means Gwen never kicks the leeches onto Courtney by accident, so she wouldn't cry in the confessional, which leads to Courtney hearing. Due to that fact, she still hates Gwen. Ezekiel returns from Boney Island, but he doesn't have the idol, although he did try to find it. Courtney and Scott don't start their little interactions, since they're not on the same team here. This also means Scott is less motivated to eat, as Courtney yelling is what made him do it. I'm gonna assume Courtney and Duncan swap spots for eating now, since they have opposite teams. But then I remembered Courtney would probably still keep the foot soldiers do the work while I hang back thing. So she chooses to go last, hoping the rest of the team will finish the pancakes before she even has to go. This means Ezekiel takes the spot of Duncan instead, as I imagine he's able to eat quite a bit, making things a bit closer. It also means Gwen barfs on Ezekiel instead of Duncan, who goes next. Since not everyone on the villains team has gone this time, Chris doesn't allow Sam and Zoe to swap, as he only allowed it if Heather and Al did too. But Heather needs to finish her portion, so her and Zoe continue. Neither would do as good as the original person did, meaning we can continue with Sam versus Alejandro. Sam is able to bring it back for the heroes, since the villains were a bit further behind without Courtney, and due to Scott's motivation being lowered. However, Sam still took some pancakes for later, so he gets voted off. Scott goes to Boney Island, and Chris now chooses to swap Duncan and Courtney, as Courtney hasn't been very heroic. She chose to let her team do all the work twice now, which is pretty villainous. Duncan gets the same welcome as he did in canon, but Zeke doesn't really care for him. Courtney also doesn't care much for Scott, but their cute little interactions would begin in this episode after Scott comes back from Boney Island. Courtney isn't gonna laugh at Gwen's jokes since she isn't sympathetic to her, as she never heard her crying. She still hates Gwen almost entirely. Duncan isn't insecure about Courtney and Scott since they haven't interacted until now, which he wouldn't know about. Ezekiel is able to help the heroes catch up a lot faster, but Mal swapping to Mike leads to them losing. Scott goes to Boney Island again, but Gwen doesn't break up with Duncan since he's less insecure about Courtney. Because Cameron volunteered for elimination and we have an extra person, Chris would probably just let it happen. We really don't need more members on the cast, and this is the one episode where nobody gets booted originally. Well, besides the next one where Cameron also gets saved from elimination. Yeah, he does that a lot. So now Cameron gets a really lame elimination, but I think that would kind of be the point. He's like, oh, I volunteer, and then Chris is like, okay. And then he's just, okay, bye. Since there's no new guy on the team, Cord is obviously going to be trying to boot Gwen instead. Since Zoe said if she offered Duncan the apple a few days ago he wouldn't have accepted it, I don't think he would here, as he's been with the heroes for less time and is still dating Gwen, so he's less open to friendships. He's also a lot less worried about his image this time, which allows him to focus more on the challenge. He would probably just steal the egg from the bird instead of crying about it, but maybe he'd still be remorseful, but not to the same extent. In addition to that, they also have Ezekiel on their team, so the hamsters are able to win easily once more. Alejandro steals Heather's invincibility statue and uses it to save himself, which means his vote for Heather is the final one, and that gets rid of her. Gwen and Courtney also don't ally since Gwen is still dating Duncan and Courtney doesn't care about Gwen as much. Duncan and Gwen interact briefly, with Gwen starting to dislike him a lot more now. Courtney helps Scott up after his loss to Fang, which takes Duncan off. Sierra would be less crazy now that Cameron's been gone a while, but she does still freak out about Cody. Cameron isn't there, so he doesn't point out the rigging of the game, which means Mike has to face his own fears. Chris couldn't find a clone of Mike though, so he settled for the mutant gophers from last season. Mal is shown to be strong, but I don't know if he could take 4 gophers at once. Gonna have to give him the L here. This puts the score at 1-1, and Duncan refuses to hit the baby bird, so he doesn't win either. Gwen ends up fighting Courtney, but Courtney still hates Gwen, so they're not playing nice at first. But I do think that they'd finally make up after punching it out, and Gwen dumps Duncan right there due to him still focusing on Courtney. And so the villains get 2 points from Chris, giving them the win. They also get to choose who gets voted out from the other team. Without Cameron there, I don't think Sierra would be a big pick for the elimination. Gwen and Courtney both want Duncan, Scott would want Zoe, and Al would probably want Ezekiel gone. So I think Duncan probably gets the boot here since he's just the majority, which is lame, but it's only an episode early, who cares. The teams merge, and this gives us the Regatta Challenge. Mal messes up all the boats, but Ezekiel catches up to him, jumping on the big boat with him. Mal tries to get him to leave, but he won't, so they start fighting. This fight gives Gwen and Courtney the lead, and Sierra and Zoe are left with the raft, and Scott jumps on. As they're rowing, they find Ezekiel in the water, and Zoe helps him up onto the raft. He tells her that Mike shoved him off his boat, which freaks Zoe and Sierra out. But Scott just says, if I saw you on my boat, I'd do the same. Ezekiel gets angry, so he shoves Scott off the raft, which attracts Fang. Sierra weaves a little lever to hold up Scott, which lets Fang push the raft. Chef drops dynamite onto them, but Ezekiel catches it and throws it away. I do think Sierra would be able to suggest Zoe get into some danger to see if Mike is really Mike, since she watched Revenge of the Island. This causes Mike to snap back to reality, only for Mal to return. Ezekiel sees that Mike isn't a good guy, and he's taking way too long to help Zoe, so he springs into action, jumping off the raft and splashing into the piranhas. This makes them spread out, and so the two swim away until Mal shows up, but he's too late, as now Ezekiel has saved Zoe, which she thanks him for. Mal lets them on his boat to compensate and apologizes to Ezekiel for how things went down earlier, but it's obviously disingenuous. He's trying to keep up his mic appearance for Zoe. As for the winner of the challenge, it's Alejandro still, and he chooses not to bring anybody to the spa hotel. Looking at the votes, Mal rigged them against Cameron originally, and if it wasn't for Duncan blowing up his cottage, Chris was gonna honor that. And we didn't save Cameron the first time, so we aren't gonna save whoever takes his place here. And who does Mal have the biggest beef with right now? Ezekiel. I know, he's in the title, but he doesn't make it near the end. It sucks, but this is what I feel would realistically happen with the season All-Stars gave to us. Mike, Al, Scott, and Courtney all have decent reason to want Zeke gone, and Chris has ignored vote rigs before, even when multiple people stepped up to say their votes weren't for that person. But here, like I said, everybody has a decent reason to want Ezekiel gone. And in the original episode, Cameron says that the votes can't be unanimous because he didn't vote for himself, but Chris didn't care. Like I said, he only got saved because of Duncan, but Duncan's not here now. So, Ezekiel gets sent off, with him warning Zoe and Sierra about Mike before leaving. But just because Ezekiel's gone doesn't mean the what if is over. We've still got Sierra instead of Cameron, which changes things going forward. So let's keep going. That night, Mal moves the evidence under Al's pillow, but Al swaps it, causing Sierra to think Mike rigged the vote against Ezekiel. Zoe says it doesn't make any sense, but Sierra is very suspicious now. Zeke was a really good judge of character with Alejandro last season, so Sierra is trusting of him. But now, since Ezekiel isn't kidnapping Chris, we get the original episode, which was something to do with rhinoceroses, fire, poison, smallpox, gluten, and formaldehyde, as Chris stated. Now, in terms of what that would look like and how that ties into previous seasons, I've got no clue. So I'm just going to say this episode follows similar plot beats to the original, but obviously with the impacts of the what if. Gwen and Sierra pair up since Sierra can't really trust Mike and she needs an ally. Alejandro gets held back somehow, which replaces his boot getting stuck. Mal suggests to Zoe that they team up with Scott, but obviously that's insane to her that Mike would even want to do that ever. In response, Mal stutters, saying that it was just a possible option. Courtney and Scott bump into Zoe and Mal, but Cameron can't kiss Courtney, and I don't think Mal's gonna suggest Zoe kiss her. So at some point, Zoe gets trapped in some way, and Mal decides to leave her behind like he did to Cam originally. Alejandro arrives, offering to save Zoe, but she refuses, saying she doesn't need his help. She brings out some of her commando skills, remembering her friend Brick from last season. After making it out of that situation, she meets up with Gwen and Sierra, and the three work together, with Zoe asking if they've seen Mike. They have not. Eventually, Gwen ends up winning the challenge like she did in canon. She sends Alejandro to Boney Island, and Sierra gets some sort of injury due to the poison or rhinos or whatever else. She got hurt in some way, which mirrors Cameron's original boot. So goodbye Sierra, and now she's voted off. This means the rest of the season plays out the exact same way until the finale, at least kind of. Cameron didn't get injured now, but he's a lot less brave since he didn't make it far on either season he's on. So Cam and Gwen end up doing just about as much as they did for Zoe originally. Oh yeah, that also means Zoe can win 2 seasons back to back, win and get second, or get second and then win. Or she can get second twice. But yeah, that's Ezekiel if he was an All-Stars following the events of the last 3 videos. I know it wasn't super eventful, but I really tried to write interesting stuff while still following what I think would actually happen. My original plan was for Lindsay to make it past episode 1 and her and Ezekiel work together as a duo, but I just don't think anybody else would get booted first. Lindsay failed the team that episode, even with Ezekiel's help. And then I noticed the similarities between this season and World Tour's last few episodes, so I made Zeke try and save Zoe from Mal in place of Lindsay and Al. The duo with Sierra would just be a natural extension from World Tour, but I don't think they'd be a super substantial pair, which is why they didn't really do much here. But yeah, that's the what if. Big thank you to Derpy Murloc, who's our only member so far, and I hope you guys will hopefully check out the member system and see the awesome perks you get and want to support the channel. But as always, tell me if you liked this video, comment your requests for future videos, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.